This is the aftermath of political interference. The island of Cyprus has experienced a massive disaster. A major power station is in ruins and a military base has been destroyed. But it's not for the reason you might think. The base hasn't been attacked in some border dispute or power grab, and the political jiggling around the disaster wasn't instigated by Cyprus at all really. It has been caught up in a civil war in another country, well kind of, all for just storing some confiscated cargo. But it's not a shipment of cheap plastic trinkets from Temu, instead it's gunpowder and artillery shells from Iran, apparently meant to be shipped to Syria. The year is 2011, and the destruction we are seeing is from one of the largest non-nuclear explosions of the 21st century up until that point. The explosion would only be eclipsed by the infamous Beirut explosion just a few years later. Today we're looking at the Evangelos Florakis Naval Base explosion. My name is John and welcome to Plainly Difficult. This video wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my Patreon, YouTube and Ko-fi members. If you want early access to the channel's videos and also ad-free access to the channel's videos, then you can from just £1 per month. And as always, the link will be in the pinned comment below. The base. This is the Evangelos Florakis Naval Base. The base is, well, based near Zigi, along the southern coast of Cyprus. It is one of the main compounds for the Cypriot Navy, originally called the Mari Naval Base. It was renamed to honour the head of the Cypriot National Guard, Evangelos Florakis, after dying in a helicopter crash in 2002. Next door to the base is the Vasyllikos power station. It's a gas, heavy oil and coal-fired power plant. It is the home of the second tallest structure on the island, and it is the country's newest power plant. It produces around half of the Republic of Cyprus's electricity, as stated in ICME. It lies immediately to the west of the Vasyllikos desolation and power plant that supplies about half the power for the island country. Needless to say, it is rather important for the country's economy. Now, the base offers a good spot for storing things you don't want just anyone getting their hands on, like maybe explosive material for example. Confiscated cargo. This is the MV Monchegosk. It was an SA-15 type ice-breaking cargo ship. The vessel, since its construction, had very close ties to Russia, then also as the Soviet Union, when first registered in 1983. After being registered to Russia after the fall of the Iron Curtain, she would end up being registered in Limassol in Cyprus from 1993. Ownership transferred to NB Shipping, a subsidiary of MSCO, also a Russian company, and was used far away from its originally intended icy waters. In January 2009, the MV Monchegosk departed Iran en route for the Suez Canal. Upon reaching the canal, she was forced into an Egyptian port where she was searched, where weapons were found, but the ship was released as it wasn't 100% known if the munitions had failed UN Resolution 1747. This was the banning of shipping of weapons from Iran. She was apprehended by the US Navy later on in the Red Sea, and her weapons cargo was discovered inside shipping containers. The US deemed that the cargo was in fact contravening UN 1742. She was ordered back to Limassol, her port of registry. Upon there, a full detailed search would be undertaken. When at Limassol, the full extent of the banned goods would be found. In total, 98 containers of gunpowder, artillery shells and other weapons paraphernalia. Responsibility for the dangerous goods fell into the lap of the Cypriot government and by extension the country's navy. It was offloaded and moved for storage off the port to Evangelos Florakis Naval Base. The containers were stacked 3 high at the northeast corner of the site, roughly 400 metres from the nearby power station and the main buildings of the naval base. And there, it would sit for over 2 years out in the open and exposed to the elements and the hot sun. The disaster. It is the evening of the 4th of July 2011, and staff on the naval base have noticed something rather odd. The pile of shipping containers has one on top of the southeast corner bulging. The peculiar goings-on was reported to the base commander the next morning, who then arranged a meeting with the Ministry of Defence, after which an inspection of the containers was undertaken, as noted again by ICME. On the 7th of July 2011, the chief expert prepared a safety report with recommendations including the destruction of the explosives. The following day, the pile was doused with water pumped from a nearby fire truck. Over the 8th, firefighters, police and conscripts doused the containers, which had an estimated 500 tons of explosives within. In the early hours of the 11th of July, flashes could be observed in the dark sky. Flames erupted from the containers, and this was just after 3 a.m. An alarm was raised on the base. Navy personnel started battling the fire, but to no avail. The call was then put out to the local emergency services. Firefighters were scrambled to the storage site to try and fight the flames. 2 engines and 6 firefighters attended the fire at 4:27 in the morning and began assisting the Navy personnel. At 5:55 in the morning, a massive explosion blew out of the container stack, showering steel all over the surrounding area. It would later be estimated to be an explosion with a yield of 0.48 kilotons, measuring a seismic moment of 3. A massive shockwave hit out into the nearby power station, knocking it offline. Houses also nearby were hit with the shockwave and debris, causing substantial damage. The initial explosion killed 12 people instantly, with 60 more injured. Among the dead were the captain of the Navy and commander of the Evangelos Florakis Naval Base. The damage to the nearby power station would require rolling blackouts across Cyprus. In total, 150 properties were damaged, costing millions in euro in repairs. The explosion caused a massive crater where the storage containers had once sat. The injured were taken to hospitals for medical treatment across the island, where one more person would sadly die. This brought the final death toll to 13. The aftermath. The economic effects of the explosion were wide-reaching. Much of the south of the island had to deal with rolling blackouts and power shortages. This necessitated sourcing generators from all across the Mediterranean, with Greece providing shipping container-based generators. On top of the damage to the Vasilikos power station, a large amount of fuel had been damaged, further adding to the financial hit. A deal was struck with North Cyprus to also supply power. It wouldn't be until 2013 that the power station would be brought back to generating electricity, costing $992 million in repairs. The explosion had an estimated cost of $2.83 billion to the Cypriot economy. The cause of the fire that started the explosion would be probed by a one-member research committee. This was led by one of the country's leading lawyers. The immediate cause released in their report was put down to self-ignition due to materials being left out in the open and exposed in the hot sun, as noted in riskex.co.uk. The method of storing the material was contrary to any rules for storage of ammunition and/or explosives and was wholly inadequate. They were not isolated from the sun and were piled on top of each other. Throughout the month of July, temperatures steadily rose, hitting a peak of 32 degrees centigrade before the explosion. There was also another theory that was posed around the same time, that the ignition was from a local bushfire. However, this hasn't been confirmed. Eventually, the munitions had deteriorated over the 2 years and had become unstable. Clearly, they weren't happy, as the deformed storage container first discovered on the 5th of July clearly hints at. But finding out the exact cause is unfortunately very difficult, as samples of the debris that were taken, which were intended to be sent to Greece for testing, were not ever actually sent. But why did the munitions stay on site for over 2 years? Political issues meant that the site wasn't cleared, because the weapons were reportedly headed for Syria, which was at the time in a full swing civil war. Cyprus was apprehensive to do anything with the goods. As such, offers from the UK, EU and US to dispose of the arms were refused by the Cypriot government. The Navy was not inexperienced in munition storage. As well, they had their own weapons and thus had correct handling procedures, but for this particular scenario, it would seem the Navy was very unprepared. You would think the acquisition of the cargo would have triggered a risk assessment and an emergency plan, but it didn't. All the time, it just sat there. It was increasing its risk of self-detonation. It was found during the investigation that multiple concerns were raised about the poor storage conditions, but officials only really cared about its security rather than safety to those around it. All of this came out during the investigations, and as such, the disaster had a terrible political fallout. This would result in multiple resignations and even some criminal convictions. Marcus Krypaniou, the Cypriot Foreign Minister, and Cypriot Defence Minister Kostas Papakostas, and the National Guard Commander-in-Chief, General Petros Tassalakidis, resigned over the explosion. Cypriot President Dimitris Christofias was pointed for blame in the investigation report. Of course, Christofias rejected the results. He would continue on in his post until 2013. Although the president was immune to criminal prosecution, the government as a whole would be found criminally negligent in 2016. But a few years earlier in 2013, 4 officials including Defence Minister Kostas would be found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years, with the other 3 being given 2 years respectively. So it's time for my scale. It's going to be a 3. And this is what I've got for my disaster card. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. This is a Plain Difficult production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos produced by me, John, in a currently wet and windy corner of southern London, UK. And all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and Mr. Music, can you play us out please?